Single dad. Mechanic was changing oil until Delta Force recognized his tattoo, the Ghost of Kabul. And in that split second, the quiet man under the truck froze because the soldiers staring at him weren't looking at a stranger. They were looking at the legend they thought was buried in Kabul. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun painted golden stripes across the concrete floor of Tanner's Auto Repair. Country music drifted from an old radio perched on a workbench, its antenna bent but still catching the local station. Jack Tanner's strong hands moved with practiced ease over the engine of a battered Ford F-150, his fingers finding each bolt and bearing by memory. "Daddy, what's the answer to 8 times 7? Emma's voice piped up from her makeshift study spot, a stack of well-worn tires topped with her math workbook. Jack wiped his hands on the red shop rag tucked into his belt. "Let's figure it out together, sweetheart. What's 8 times 5? 40, Emma answered quickly. "Good. Now add 8. 2 more times." Emma's forehead wrinkled in concentration. 40, 48, 56. Her face lit up with pride. 8 times 7 is 56. That's my girl. Jack smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. The sound of Emma's laughter was sweeter than any music. Mrs. Henderson's ancient Buick rolled into the parking lot, the muffler dragging and sending sparks across the pavement. Jack shook his head. He'd fixed that muffler 3 times already this year, but she refused to replace it. "Morning, Jack," Mrs. Henderson called out as she shuffled into the garage. Her gray hair was perfectly set, as always. "That awful noise is back." "I hear it, Mrs. H." Jack grabbed his creeper and rolled under the Buick. "Emma, honey, could you get Mrs. Henderson some water?" Emma hopped down from her tire stack and headed to the small fridge in the corner. "Would you like ice, Mrs. Henderson?" "Such good manners." Mrs. Henderson beamed. "Yes, please, dear." The old woman settled into the worn waiting room chair, accepting the water from Emma. "Your daddy's the only mechanic I trust in 3 counties. Honest as the day is long." She leaned forward conspiratorially. "Though I must say, for someone who's lived here 5 years, we hardly know a thing about him." Emma shrugged, used to the town's curiosity about her father. Daddy says actions speak louder than words. Under the Buick, Jack allowed himself a small smile at his daughter's response. The town's gentle probing never stopped, but Emma had learned to deflect it with grace beyond her years. She was so much like her mother that way. The sleeve of his work shirt rode up as he reached for a wrench, revealing the edge of his tattoo. The winged skull seemed to stare back at him, the words "Ghost of Kabul" partially hidden under years of engine grease. Jack quickly tugged his sleeve down, pushing away the memories that threatened to surface. Regular customers stopped by, some with genuine car troubles, others just looking for conversation. Jack kept his responses polite but brief, focusing on the work at hand. Around noon, Bill Tucker from the bank dropped by, ostensibly for a tire rotation. "Business looking up, Jack?" he asked, his voice casual but his eyes sharp. "Holding steady," Jack replied, keeping his voice even. The stack of unpaid bills in his office told a different story, but he'd rather work his fingers to the bone than ask for help. Emma watched the exchange from her tire stack, her young face showing more understanding than it should. Later, as Jack helped her pack up her homework, she hugged him tight. Jack's throat tightened as he hugged her back. "We're more than okay, Princess." He looked down at her earnest face, seeing Sarah's features in their daughter's. The loss of his wife 3 years ago still ached, but Emma's presence made it bearable. The afternoon sun began its descent, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Jack wiped down his tools, placing each one carefully in its designated spot. Emma had gone home with Mrs. Peterson next door, where she stayed until Jack closed up shop. The radio played softly as he counted the day's earnings, barely enough to cover the week's parts order. But the trucks and cars he'd fixed would get their owners to work safely, put food on their tables. That meant something. Standing in the doorway of his shop, Jack watched the sun sink toward the horizon. The Texas sky stretched endless and free above him, so different from the cramped mountain passes of Afghanistan. Here, in this small town, he'd found a measure of peace he never thought possible after everything he'd seen, everything he'd done. "Thank you, Lord," he whispered, his quiet words carried away by the evening breeze. "For this day, for Emma, for second chances." In the distance, a train whistle echoed across the plains, and somewhere, a dog barked at the coming night. Jack breathed in the familiar sense of oil, metal, and Texas dust. Everything was simple here, honest, just the way he needed it to be. He reached for the shop keys, the metal warm from sitting in his pocket all day. The lock clicked shut with a satisfying sound, a period at the end of another ordinary day in a string of ordinary days. And that was just fine with Jack Tanner. The next morning brought another wave of heat to Willow Creek, the kind that made the air shimmer above the asphalt. Jack lay beneath a rust-spotted Chevy pickup, his weathered hands working methodically to loosen an oil filter. The familiar sense of motor oil and dust filled his nostrils as country music played softly from the radio. The crunch of boots on gravel made him pause. Multiple sets of footsteps, heavy and measured military precision. Jack's muscles tensed instinctively, though he kept his movements steady. "Morning," a cheerful voice called out. "Anyone home?" Jack slid out from under the truck, squinting against the sunlight that framed two tall figures in the garage doorway. Their uniforms were crisp Delta Force standard issue, patches marking them as sergeant and lieutenant. "Welcome to Tanner's," Jack said, wiping his hands on a red shop rag. "What can I do for you?" The younger of the two, sporting sergeant's stripes, stepped forward with an easy grin. "Sergeant Cole Harker," he said, extending his hand. "This here's Lieutenant Mason Reed. We're heading back to Fort Hood, but our ride could use some fresh oil." Jack nodded, noting their rental car parked outside. "Should take about 30 minutes. Coffee maker's over there if you want some while you wait." "Appreciate it," Lieutenant Reed said quietly. His eyes carried the weight that Jack recognized the look of someone who'd seen too much. As Jack gathered his supplies, Sergeant Harker leaned against a workbench. "Man, this heat's something else. Reminds me of Kandahar. Except there we at least had the excuse of being in a desert." Jack gave a non-committal grunt, focusing on setting up the oil drain pan. The mention of Afghanistan made his shoulder blades itch, right where the tattoo lay hidden under his work shirt. "You serve?" Harker asked casually. "Long time ago," Jack replied, keeping his voice neutral. He started the oil change, letting the familiar routine settle his nerves. The soldiers made small talk while they waited, sharing jokes about military life that hit too close to home. Jack worked efficiently, trying to speed them on their way. But as he reached up to check the dipstick, his sleeve rode up. The movement exposed the edge of his tattoo, just a glimpse of black ink, but enough. Lieutenant Reed's coffee cup clattered against the workbench, coffee splashing onto the concrete. "That tattoo," Reed whispered, his face draining of color. "Those wings. That skull." Jack pulled his sleeve down sharply, but the damage was done. Both soldiers stared at him with wide eyes. "Ghost?" Reed's voice was barely audible. "The Ghost of Kabul? You've got the wrong man," Jack said flatly, turning back to the car. Harker stepped closer, excitement evident in his voice. "Sir, if you're really him, the one who saved Echo Team during the Exodus, I said you've got the wrong man." Jack's voice carried an edge of steel. "That'll be $45 for the oil change." "But the tattoo," Reed pressed, his expression intense. "That design, it was exclusive to the team that day. I know, because my father." He stopped abruptly, swallowing hard. Jack met their gazes steadily. Lots of units had skull designs. Nothing special about this one. "You're mistaking me for someone else." "Sir," Harker said respectfully, "everyone knows Ghost died saving his team that day. But if you survived, your car's done." Jack cut him off, wiping his hands with finality. "You should head out if you want to beat traffic to Fort Hood. The soldiers exchanged glances, loaded with unspoken words. They paid in silence, but their eyes never left Jack as they moved toward their car. Outside, Jack could hear them talking in low voices. The wind carried fragments of their conversation. Brass won't believe this. He stood in the doorway of his shop, one hand pressed against the frame, as if to steady himself. His heart hammered against his ribs like it had that day in Kabul, when the world exploded into chaos and blood. The horizon stretched endlessly before him, but all he could see were the ghosts of his past, rising up like dust devils in the Texas heat. The rental car's engine turned over, and gravel crunched under its tires as it pulled away. Jack watched until it disappeared around the bend, taking with it the fragile peace he'd built in this quiet corner of the world. His eyes remained fixed on that empty horizon, haunted by memories he'd thought were safely buried. The radio played on behind him, a Willie Nelson song about running from the past. But Jack barely heard it over the sound of his own racing pulse. The evening sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Jack and Emma walked hand in hand into Ruby's diner. The neon sign buzzed overhead, and the bell above the door chimed their arrival. The familiar aroma of fried chicken and fresh coffee wrapped around them like a warm blanket. "Well, if it isn't my favorite father-daughter duo," Ruby called from behind the counter, her silver hair catching the light. She wiped her hands on her red checkered apron and grabbed 2 menus, though she knew they wouldn't need them. Emma skipped ahead to their usual booth by the window, sliding across the worn vinyl seats. "Can I have chocolate milk today, Miss Ruby?" "You sure can, sweetheart." Ruby winked at the little girl before turning to Jack. Her usual easy smile flickered for just a moment. "The usual for you, Jack?" He nodded, noticing how her eyes lingered on him a fraction longer than normal. The diner hummed with the usual evening crowd. Farmers fresh from the fields, mechanics from the shop down the road, families gathering for their daily ritual of shared meals and small-town gossip. But something felt different. The comfortable background chatter seemed to dip when he walked in, only to resume in hushed tones. Old Pete Anderson at the counter kept stealing glances his way. Sarah from the flower shop whispered something to her husband, both of them turning slightly to look at Jack. Emma remained blissfully unaware, coloring on her placemat with the crayons Ruby always kept ready for her. "Daddy, look, I'm drawing your garage." "That's beautiful, sweetie," Jack said, forcing a smile. He could hear fragments of conversations floating around him. Heard it from Cole himself at the gas station. Ghost of Kabul. All this time, right, here in Willow Creek. Ruby returned with their drinks, chocolate milk for Emma and black coffee for Jack. She hesitated before setting down Jack's cup. "You know how folks talk in a small town," she said quietly, "especially when something interesting comes along." Jack's jaw tightened. Nothing interesting about a mechanic and his daughter having dinner. Ruby's usually sharp eyes softened. Maybe not. But there might be something interesting about a hero who's been hiding in plain sight. Before Jack could respond, the bell chimed again as Pastor Jim walked in. The older man's presence always seemed to fill a room without trying. He nodded to several regulars before making his way to Jack's booth. "Evening, Jack." "Emma, that's quite an artistic masterpiece you've got there." Pastor Jim smiled warmly at the little girl before turning back to Jack. "Mind if we talk tomorrow? Say, around 10? Jack knew it wasn't really a question. "I'll be there." The rest of dinner passed in a blur of sideways glances and whispered conversations. Emma chatted happily about school and her drawings, while Jack pushed his meatloaf around his plate, his appetite gone. The next morning brought no relief. The spring air was crisp and clean, but the atmosphere in town felt heavy with curiosity. The postman lingered longer than usual at the garage, asking about Jack's service years with poorly concealed interest. Regular customers found excuses to stay and chat, their eyes drifting to his forearms as if trying to spot the infamous tattoo through the grease stains. By mid-morning, Jack couldn't take it anymore. He left his teenage apprentice in charge and walked the 3 blocks to the white-steepled church where Pastor Jim waited. The pastor's office was cool and quiet, smelling of old books and coffee. Jim sat behind his desk, his Vietnam service photo hanging unobtrusively on the wall behind him. "Quite a stir you've caused," Pastor Jim said, pouring 2 cups of coffee, "though I suspect that's the last thing you wanted." Jack accepted the coffee but didn't drink. "I built a life here, Jim. A quiet one. For Emma. And you think that life is threatened now that people know who you are? They don't know who I am," Jack said sharply. "They know a story. A legend. The Ghost of Kabul. Some kind of hero who disappeared. That's not me anymore." Pastor Jim leaned back in his chair, studying Jack with eyes that had seen their own share of war. "Truth has a way of coming home, son. Maybe it's time to stop running from it." "I'm not running," Jack protested. "I'm protecting my daughter." "Are you?" The pastor's voice was gentle but firm. "Or are you hiding from yourself?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications Jack wasn't ready to face. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "I appreciate the coffee, Pastor," he said stiffly. Jim nodded, understanding in his eyes. "We're here when you're ready, Jack. All of us. The rest." The piece of the day passed in a haze of curious visitors and knowing looks. Even Ruby stopped by the garage with a fresh pie, her usual chatter subdued by genuine concern. Emma bounced around the shop, proudly telling anyone who would listen about her brave daddy, though she didn't quite understand what everyone was talking about. That evening, Jack stood in Emma's doorway, watching her peaceful sleep. Moonlight filtered through her curtains, casting soft shadows across her innocent face. Her stuffed bear was tucked under one arm, and her dark hair fanned out on the pillow like a halo. In that moment, all the weight of his past seemed to press down on his shoulders. The memories he tried so hard to bury threatened to surface. The heat, the dust, the screams, the choices that had earned him his nickname. The man his daughter thought he was, and the man he'd been, seemed worlds apart. "You deserve a father," he whispered into the darkness. "Not a ghost." He closed her door quietly, the soft click of the latch echoing in his chest like a gunshot. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when the glossy black SUV rolled into Tanner's Auto Repair. Its government plates and tinted windows stood out like a crow among sparrows in the small-town setting. Jack's hands stilled on the wrench he was holding, his shoulders tensing as he watched the vehicle come to a stop in front of his shop. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Captain Elena Torres. Her pressed uniform and polished boots seemed almost too pristine for the dusty Texas morning. She moved with the measured grace of someone used to carrying authority, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her expression professionally neutral. Jack set down his tools and wiped his hands on a shop rag, leaving streaks of oil against the worn cotton. The familiar weight of unspoken words hung in the air between them. "Mr. Tanner," she said, her voice carrying across the quiet lot. "May we speak privately?" He nodded, toward his office. A small room off the main garage floor. The space was spare but neat. A metal desk, 2 chairs, and a wall of filing cabinets. A child's crayon drawing of a rainbow hung next to his business license. Captain Torres closed the door behind them. "You've done well for yourself here," she said, glancing around. "It's a long way from Kabul." "I'm just a mechanic now," Jack replied, his voice level. He remained standing, arms crossed. "We both know that's not entirely true." She pulled out a thin folder from her briefcase. "The Kabul Exodus mission file is still classified at the highest levels. Even I don't have full clearance. But whispers travel fast in certain circles, especially when 2 young soldiers from Fort Hood start talking about meeting a ghost." Jack's jaw tightened. Those boys were mistaken. Were they? Torres met his gaze steadily. "Because their description matches perfectly with the operative known as Ghost, the one who saved 16 men that night before disappearing into the mountains, the one presumed KIA until now." Sunlight filtered through the dusty window, catching the silver wings on Torres's uniform. Jack could feel the weight of his dog tags, still hanging around his neck after all these years, hidden beneath his work shirt. "What do you want from me, Captain?" "Nothing. I'm here to warn you." She leaned forward slightly. "There are people in Washington who never stopped asking questions about that night. If you come forward, if you confirm who you are, you'll open a door you can't close. Everything you've built here." She gestured to the office, to the life beyond its walls. "It could all change." Jack's thoughts drifted to Emma, to their quiet evenings doing homework, to Sunday morning pancakes and summer fishing trips, to the peace they'd found in this small corner of Texas. "I appreciate the warning," he said finally, "but like I told those soldiers, they've got the wrong man. I'm not a soldier anymore. I'm just a dad, trying to raise his daughter right." Torres studied him for a long moment, then nodded. She understood, perhaps better than most would. "The file stays closed then." She stood, straightening her uniform. "For what it's worth, what you did that night, it mattered. It still does." Jack followed her out to the SUV. The morning had grown warmer, and cicadas buzzed in the oak trees lining the property. Torres paused before getting in the vehicle. "Take care of yourself, Ghost," she said quietly, then caught herself. "Mr. Tanner." He watched the SUV pull away, dust trailing behind it like memories he couldn't quite shake. The sun was hot on his neck as he absently rubbed his forearm where the tattoo lay hidden under his sleeve. The winged skull that marked him as something more than just a small-town mechanic. The ink had faded over the years, but the meaning hadn't. Like a scar that wouldn't fade, it remained a reminder of who he'd been, of choices made in darkness, and promises kept at terrible cost. Lost in thought, Jack didn't notice Emma standing on the front porch of their house next door. She watched him with eyes that held both confusion and pride, trying to understand this new version of her father that seemed to be emerging, a man who was somehow both more and less than the daddy who fixed cars and made her lunch every morning. The morning dew still clung to the grass when Jack spotted them through his office window, a woman in a pressed blazer and a cameraman hefting equipment on his shoulder. His stomach tightened as they made their way across the gravel lot toward his garage. "Mr. Tanner?" The reporter's voice carried across the workshop floor. "I'm Sarah Martinez from Channel 7 News." She flashed a bright smile, notebook in hand. The cameraman was already setting up his tripod. Jack wiped his hands on a rag and shook his head. "No cameras. No interviews. The public has a right to know about the Ghost of Kabul." Sarah pressed, taking another step forward. "Your story could inspire so many people." "My story is fixing cars and raising my daughter," Jack said firmly. "That's all there is to it." He turned his back on them, focusing on the engine before him, the familiar smell of oil and metal grounding him. They left eventually, but the damage was done. The next morning's Willow Creek Gazette splashed across its front page. "Local mechanic once hero, Ghost of Kabul rumors resurface." Jack's old military photo stared back at him from beside a grainy shot of him working in his garage. The article was filled with speculation and quotes from anonymous military sources. Emma bounced into the kitchen, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "Dad, you're in the paper." Her eyes shone with pride as she studied the photograph. "It's nothing, sweetheart." Jack folded the paper away, but he couldn't fold away what followed. At school, Emma's teacher, Mrs. Reynolds, pulled her aside after class. "Your father is a very brave man," she said, squeezing Emma's hand. "We're all so proud to have him in our community." The church called next. Pastor Jim's voice was warm over the phone. "Jack, we'd be honored if you'd speak at the Veterans Day service. Share your story with the congregation. Help them understand what service really means." "I appreciate the offer, Pastor. But just think about it," Pastor Jim said gently. "Sometimes sharing our burdens makes them lighter." The community embraced him in ways he never expected. Mrs. Wilson from the bakery showed up with her famous apple pie. "On the house," she insisted, pressing it into his hands. "It's the least I can do for a hero."
Thank you cards began appearing in his mailbox.
Veterans stopped by the shop just to shake his hand. One morning he found small American flags planted along his driveway, fluttering in the breeze like quiet sentinels. Jack stood in his kitchen, surrounded by casseroles and baked goods, reading another card from a woman whose son was serving overseas. Her words were simple but sincere. Thank you for showing us what courage looks like. For the first time in years, he felt the walls he'd built starting to crack. The warmth of acceptance seeped through, touching places in his heart he'd thought were frozen forever. Emma noticed the change in him. "You're smiling more, Daddy," she said one evening as they cleaned up after dinner. "Maybe I am, sweetheart." He ruffled her hair. "How about we go fishing? Just you and me?" Her face lit up. "Really? Now?" "Why not? The pond's best at sunset." They gathered their fishing gear, 2 simple poles, and a tackle box that had seen better days. The evening air was sweet with late summer warmth as they walked the familiar path to the pond. Crickets were starting their evening chorus, and the setting sun painted the sky in soft pinks and golds. They found their spot under the old oak tree. Jack helped Emma bait her hook, smiling as she wrinkled her nose at the worm. They cast their lines into the still water, the small splashes rippling across the surface. "Dad?" Emma's voice was thoughtful. "Are you really a hero, like everyone says?" Jack watched their bobbers float on the water. "I just did what needed doing, Emma. Sometimes that's all being a hero means. Doing what's right when it needs to be done." She nodded, considering this. "Well, I think you're a hero, just for being my dad." His throat tightened with emotion. Here, in this moment, with his daughter beside him and the peace of the evening surrounding them, Jack felt something shift inside. Maybe he could be both. The man he was and the man he'd become. Maybe the past didn't have to be a weight around his neck, but a part of who he was, scars and all. Emma's giggle broke through his thoughts as she reeled in another small bluegill. "Look, Dad, that's 3 for me." Jack laughed, helping her unhook the fish. "You're putting your old man to shame, kiddo." The moment was perfect until something caught his eye. Through the trees, on the road that curved around the pond, a dark car sat idle. Its windows were tinted, but Jack could feel eyes watching them. The peace he'd just begun to embrace suddenly felt fragile, like frost on a window pane. The phone's shrill ring cut through the early morning quiet of the garage. Jack glanced at the unfamiliar number lighting up his screen, grease-stained thumb hovering over the answer button. Something in his gut told him this wasn't another customer calling about an oil change. "Tanner's Auto Repair," he answered, his voice steady despite the unease crawling up his spine. "This is Congressman Briggs. We need to talk." The voice was smooth as polished marble, but Jack's hand tightened around the phone until his knuckles went white. That voice, he'd know it anywhere. The same voice that had ordered his team into that death trap in Kabul. "Colonel," Jack replied, the old title slipping out before he could quote, "Stop it." Briggs corrected with a gentle chuckle that didn't reach his words. "I'm in town for a campaign stop. Thought I'd swing by this afternoon. Catch up with an old friend." Friend. The word tasted like ash in Jack's mouth. "I'm pretty busy today." "Make time," Briggs cut in, steel beneath the silk. 3 o'clock. The line went dead. Jack set the phone down carefully, though everything in him wanted to hurl it across the room. He closed his eyes, drawing in a deep breath that smelled of motor oil and metal. The familiar scents usually calmed him, but not today. Today they just reminded him how much he had to lose. The hours crawled by like wounded animals. Jack went through the motions, changing filters, checking tire pressure, smiling at customers. But his mind kept circling back to Kabul, to screaming radios and blood-soaked sand, to a commander who'd abandoned his men to die. At precisely 3 o'clock, a black town car rolled into the parking lot. Jack watched through the garage doors as David Briggs emerged, looking every inch the polished politician in his tailored suit. His silver hair caught the Texas sun, and his campaign smile was picture perfect. Two men in dark suits, security detail, flanked him as he approached. "Jack," Briggs called out warmly, arms spread wide like he was greeting a long-lost brother. "Look at you, local business owner, pillar of the community. Who'd have thought?" Jack didn't move to shake the offered hand. "What do you want, Briggs?" The congressman's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. He gestured to his security team. "Give us a minute, boys." They retreated to the car, leaving Jack and Briggs alone among the tools and half-repaired vehicles. "You've built yourself a nice little life here," Briggs said, running a manicured finger along the hood of a customer's truck. "Good, honest work. Beautiful daughter. Emma, isn't it? Quite the artist, from what I hear. Her teacher says. She's very talented." Jack's heart went cold. "Leave my daughter out of this." Of course, of course." Briggs held up his hands in mock surrender. "I'm just making conversation. That's what old war buddies do, right? Talk about their lives?" His voice dropped lower, harder. "Their shared history? We're not buddies," Jack growled. "And that history isn't yours to share." "No?" Briggs raised an eyebrow. "Last time I checked, I was the commanding officer on record for the Kabul exodus. The official report, the one that lists you as KIA, bears my signature." He straightened his already perfect tie. "The thing about official records, Jack, is they're very hard to dispute, especially when the only witness is legally dead." Jack's fists clenched at his sides. "Is that a threat?" "It's a friendly warning." Briggs smiled again, all teeth. "I'm running for Congress. In 6 months, I'll be sitting on the Armed Services Committee. The last thing any of us needs is some small-town mechanic stirring up ancient history with wild stories about classified missions. They're not stories. You left us to die." "I made a tactical decision in a complex situation." Briggs's voice was ice. "And if you try to say otherwise, I'll bury you again. Only this time, legally." "How do you think Emma would feel about her daddy being branded a traitor? About losing everything you've built here?" The threat hung in the air, like smoke. Jack thought of Emma's drawings posted proudly on the shop's bulletin board, of her homework sessions on the stack of tires, of her laughter echoing through these oil-stained walls. Everything he'd created to give her a normal life, Briggs could destroy it all with a few phone calls. "Think carefully about your next move, Ghost," Briggs said, already turning to leave. "Some things are better left buried in the sand." He paused at the door. "Oh, and Jack, good luck with the shop. I hear small businesses are having a tough time these days. Be a shame if anything happened to yours." Jack watched the town car pull away, taking deep breaths to keep his hands from shaking. The afternoon sun streamed through the garage windows, catching dust motes in its golden light. Everything looked the same as it had that morning, but Jack knew better. His carefully constructed peace had just been shattered. That night, after Emma was asleep, Jack knelt beside his bed, his calloused hands, still smelling faintly of motor oil, clasped together so tight his knuckles went white. The moonlight filtering through his window cast shadows on the wall, shadows that looked too much like the ones that haunted his dreams. "Lord," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "I thought I left that war behind." His fists trembled as he pressed them to his forehead. I thought I could just be Emma's dad. Just fix cars and watch her grow up." A tear slipped down his weathered cheek. "I don't know what to do. How do I choose between the truth and keeping her safe?" The only answer was the soft whisper of wind through the trees outside his window, and the distant sound of Emma's peaceful breathing from down the hall. The morning sun painted Willow Creek's white chapel in golden light as Jack's old pickup truck rumbled into the gravel parking lot. Emma bounced in her seat, her yellow dress fresh and pressed, while Jack tugged at his tie, the same one he'd worn to Sarah's funeral 3 years ago. "Daddy, look! Mason's here with Eli." Emma pointed to where Lieutenant Reed stood chatting with Pastor Jim by the church steps, his young son fidgeting with his collar nearby. Jack's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He hadn't been to church in months, not since the rumors started. But Emma had begged, and he couldn't deny her this slice of normalcy, even if his own soul felt far from peaceful. As they walked toward the chapel, familiar faces turned to greet them. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the quilting circle, wrapped Emma in a warm hug. Old Tom Parker, the hardware store owner, clasped Jack's shoulder with weathered hands. Their smiles were genuine. But Jack caught the whispers, saw the sideways glances at the man they now knew as the Ghost of Kabul. Pastor Jim met them at the door, his kind eyes crinkling. "Good to see you both," he said softly, shaking Jack's hand. "Emma, I hear you're leading the youth choir next week?" Emma beamed, launching into an excited description of her upcoming solo while Jack slipped past, finding a pew near the back. The wooden bench creaked beneath him, smooth from decades of faithful worship. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across worn hymnals. The service began with amazing grace, Emma's clear voice rising above the congregation. Jack's throat tightened as he remembered Sarah singing this same hymn, her faith unwavering even in her final days. Pastor Jim's sermon cut straight to Jack's heart. "Forgiveness isn't just about pardoning others," he said, his voice carrying to every corner. "Sometimes the hardest person to forgive is ourselves. But courage, true courage, means facing our past with honesty and grace." Jack stared at his calloused hands, remembering the weight of his rifle in Kabul, the choking dust, the screams of his men as Briggs abandoned them. He'd saved who he could, but the cost, the guilt, pressed down like a physical weight. After the final hymn, people lingered in the sanctuary, sharing coffee and conversation. Emma ran off to play with Eli, their laughter echoing through the fellowship hall. Jack was about to slip out when he felt a presence behind him. "Sir." Sergeant Cole Harker stood there with Lieutenant Reed, both in civilian clothes, but carrying themselves with military bearing. "Got a minute?" Jack nodded, following them to a quiet corner. Mason spoke first, his voice low and earnest. "We run a veteran support group. Just a few guys meeting Tuesday nights at the VFW hall. Nothing formal, just coffee and conversation. And sometimes pizza," Cole added with a slight grin. "Look, we're not trying to pressure you, but, well, your experience could help some of these younger guys. They're struggling with things only someone like you would understand." Jack's instinct was to refuse, to protect his carefully constructed isolation. But he saw the hope in their eyes, the same look he'd seen in young soldiers' faces before missions. These men still believed in the Ghost of Kabul, not as a legend, but as someone who might understand their pain. "Tuesday at 7?" he asked quietly. Their faces lit up. "Yes, sir," Cole confirmed. "Just come as you are." Sleep came fitfully, dragging him back to that hellish day in Kabul. The firefight raged around him, bullets kicking up dust. His radio crackled with Briggs's voice. "Fall back! That's an order!" But Jack saw the civilians trapped in the crossfire, heard his team's desperate calls for support. Briggs was leaving them to die, choosing political expediency over soldiers' lives. The dream shifted, memories blurring, blood on his hands, carrying wounded men through narrow alleys, the crushing weight of responsibility. "Daddy?" Emma's voice cut through the nightmare. Jack jerked awake, sheets damp with sweat, heart hammering. He found her standing in his doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Bad dream?" she asked, padding over to his bed. Jack managed a shaky smile. "Yeah, sweetheart. Did I wake you?" She shook her head. "I had a bad dream too. Can you tuck me back in?" Following her to her room, Jack smoothed her flower print blanket as she settled back into bed. Her small hand found his larger one, squeezing tight. "It's over, sweetheart. It's over," he whispered. more to himself than to her. But as he kissed her forehead and turned to leave, the weight in his chest told him otherwise. Briggs' words echoed in his mind. The false smile, the veiled threats. The past wasn't finished with him yet, and somewhere deep down, Jack knew the real battle was just beginning. The late afternoon sun beat down on Jack's garage, now busier than it had been in years. A line of cars stretched along the dusty driveway, their owners drawn by curiosity as much as car trouble. Jack wiped the sweat from his forehead with his sleeve, leaving a streak of oil across his weathered face. "Never seen so many folks need their cars fixed all at once," he muttered, sliding out from under Mrs. Peterson's Buick. The elderly woman had been waiting in her lawn chair, fanning herself and telling anyone who'd listen about how her late husband served in Vietnam. The bell above the garage door chimed. Mason Reed's tall frame cast a shadow across the concrete floor. He drove up in his old Ford pickup, which coughed and sputtered before dying right in front of the bay doors. "Sorry to add to your workload," Mason said, offering a sheepish smile. "She's been making this weird noise for days." Jack nodded, grateful for a familiar face among the parade of strangers. "Pull her in when you can. I'll take a look." As Jack bent over the engine, Mason leaned against the truck's side, watching quietly. The radio played softly in the background, country music mixing with the whir of fans and the occasional ping of cooling metal. "My father used to work on engines like this," Mason said suddenly, his voice soft. "Before Kabul." Jack's hand stilled on the wrench. He didn't look up, but his shoulders tensed. "Senior Master Sergeant James Reed," Mason continued. "He was there that night, when everything—" His voice trailed off. The weight of unspoken words hung heavy in the air. Jack's chest tightened as memories flooded back. The chaos, the gunfire, the betrayal. He hadn't known James Reed's name, but he remembered every face lost that night. "I'm sorry," Jack said finally, the words feeling inadequate. Mason shook his head. "Don't be. You did everything you could, more than anyone could have asked." Before Jack could respond, the sound of children's laughter drifted in from outside. Emma and a young boy about her age were playing near the tire stack, their giggles a stark contrast to the heavy conversation. "That's my boy Eli," Mason said, his face softening. "He's been wanting to meet Emma since he saw her at church." Jack watched as Emma showed Eli her collection of toy cars, explaining each one's imaginary history with dramatic gestures. Eli listened intently, his eyes wide with wonder. "He writes letters," Mason said quietly, "to his grandfather in heaven, to all the soldiers up there." He paused. "It helps him cope, I think." The two men worked on the truck in companionable silence, interrupted only by the occasional request for tools and the constant soundtrack of children's play. As the afternoon wore on, the crowd of customers thinned, leaving just the four of them in the scent, cooling air. "Stay for dinner," Jack found himself saying as they closed the hood. "It's just spaghetti, but there's plenty." Mason hesitated, then nodded. "That'd be nice, right, Eli?" The boy looked up from where he and Emma were drawing with chalk on the concrete. "Can we, Dad? Emma's showing me how to draw army tanks." Inside Jack's modest home, the kids sat at the kitchen table while Jack heated up the sauce. Mason insisted on helping, setting plates and filling glasses with sweet tea. The normalcy of it all felt strange, yet comforting. Over steaming plates of pasta, Eli's eyes kept darting to Jack's arms, where the edge of his tattoo peeked out from under his rolled-up sleeves. "Is it true you're a real soldier?" Eli finally asked, his voice full of awe. Jack corrected gently. "A long time ago. Dad says soldiers who die become angels who watch over us," Eli said, twirling spaghetti around his fork. "Do you think they can see us from heaven?" Emma nodded, enthusiastically. "Pastor Jim says they're like stars, always watching, even when we can't see them." Mason caught Jack's eye across the table, sharing a look of bittersweet understanding. "I write letters to my grandpa," Eli continued. "Dad helps me send them up with balloons sometimes." Do you think they get them? Jack's throat tightened. He looked at these children, so full of faith and innocence, untouched by the darkness he'd known. Emma's face shone with pride as she reached for his hand. "My daddy's a hero," she declared, beaming at their guests. "He saves people's cars now. But before, he saved people's lives." The fork in Jack's hand trembled slightly. The walls seemed to close in, memories of that night in Kabul pressing against his chest. The faces of those he couldn't save flashed through his mind, including James Reed, this little boy's grandfather. "Excuse me," he managed, pushing back from the table. "I need some air." He stepped onto the back porch, eyes wet with shame, leaving behind the warmth of the kitchen and the innocent chatter of children who believed in heroes and heaven. Behind him, through the screen door, he could hear Emma's voice continuing to tell stories about her brave daddy, while his own heart ached with the weight of truths he couldn't share and lives he couldn't save. The community hall stood modest and weathered against the darkening Texas sky, its red brick facade telling stories of decades gone by. Jack sat in his truck, watching other veterans file into the building through the rain-speckled windshield. His hands gripped the steering wheel tight enough to turn his knuckles white. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Jack made his way down a narrow hallway. The walls were lined with photographs, hundreds of faces in uniform staring back at him. Young men and women who'd given everything for their country. Some smiled brightly, while others wore the stern expression of duty. Jack's footsteps slowed as he recognized a few faces from his own time in service. The meeting room was simple. Metal folding chairs arranged in a circle, coffee and cookies on a corner table, and more photos watching from every wall. About 15 veterans had already gathered, their quiet conversations creating a gentle murmur in the space. Cole and Mason nodded at Jack from across the room, but respected his desire to sit alone. Harold Mitchell, the elderly Korean War veteran who ran the meetings, stood at the center of the circle. His weathered face carried deep lines of experience, but his eyes held a warmth that put people at ease. "Welcome, brothers and sisters," he began, his voice gruff but kind. "Let's get started." One by one, veterans shared their stories. A young woman spoke about losing her best friend to an IED in Afghanistan. An older man described struggling with nightmares 30 years after Vietnam. A Marine talked about survivor's guilt after being the only one to walk away from an ambush. Jack listened, his throat tight. Each story resonated with pieces of his own pain, fragments of memories he'd tried so hard to bury. The fluorescent lights buzzed steadily overhead as rain began to patter against the windows. When Harold's eyes met Jack's, indicating it was his turn to speak, Jack's mouth went dry. The circle fell silent, waiting. He could feel their eyes on him, not judging, just present, understanding. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the quiet. Jack opened his mouth, then closed it again. His hands trembled slightly in his lap. The words wouldn't come. How could he explain Kabul? The choices he'd made? The weight of surviving when others didn't? The betrayal that still burned like acid in his chest? The silence stretched on, heavy with unspoken pain. Jack stared at the floor, his breathing shallow. A photo of a young soldier on the wall caught his eye. The man's smile reminded him of one of his fallen teammates. Harold didn't push or rush him. The group sat in patient solidarity as Jack's silence spoke volumes about the depth of his wounds. Some nodded in understanding, recognizing the moments when pain runs too deep for words. After what felt like an eternity, Harold gently moved the meeting forward. As other veterans continued sharing, Jack felt something shift inside him, not healing exactly, but perhaps the first crack in the walls he'd built. When the meeting ended, people lingered over coffee and cookies, sharing quieter conversations. Jack headed for the door, needing air, but Harold's voice stopped him. "Hold up there, son," the older veteran called, walking over with the aid of a cane. His lined face creased with a knowing smile. "First meetings are always the hardest. Jack nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "I'm sorry. I couldn't. Nothing to be sorry for," Harold interrupted, placing a firm hand on Jack's shoulder. "Sometimes silence says more than words ever could." The rain drummed steadily on the roof as they stood. In the hallway, Harold's eyes moved to the wall of photographs. "I knew every one of these boys when they were alive," he said softly. "Used to think staying quiet about it all was the only way to honor them. Took me decades to learn different." Jack finally looked up, meeting the older man's steady gaze. Harold's next words cut straight to his core. "You don't need to stay buried to honor the dead." The simple truth of it hit Jack like a physical blow. He swallowed hard, looking again at the faces on the wall. All those lives, all those stories, some told and some forever silent. Outside, the rain had picked up, falling in heavy sheets. Jack ran to his truck, already soaked by the time he climbed inside. The engine rumbled to life, windshield wipers pushing back the curtain of water as he pulled onto the empty street. In the rear-view mirror, his reflection appeared ghostly in the dim light. Water dripped from his hair, ran down his face like tears. He studied himself for a long moment, really seeing the weight of all he'd carried alone. "Maybe it's time to stop running," he whispered to his reflection, the words barely audible over the drumming rain. The morning sun painted Willow Creek's town square in shades of gold and amber. American flags fluttered in the gentle November breeze, creating a patriotic tapestry against the clear Texas sky. Rows of white folding chairs stretched across the freshly mowed grass, waiting for the Veterans Day ceremony to begin. Jack Tanner stood behind the small stage, his calloused hands smoothing down his pressed blue shirt for the 100th time. He hadn't worn proper dress clothes in years, and the collar felt too tight around his neck. His weathered fingers traced the edges of the speech in his pocket, simple words scrawled on notebook paper the night before. "Daddy, you look handsome," Emma said, appearing beside him in her Sunday best, a yellow dress that matched the morning sunshine. Her brown hair was tied back with a ribbon, and her eyes sparkled with pride. Jack managed a weak smile. "Thanks, sweetheart." His stomach churned as more people filed into the square. He recognized faces from the diner, the hardware store, his regular customers, all here to listen to him speak, to hear the truth about the Ghost of Kabul. Pastor Jim approached, clipboard in hand. "About 5 minutes, Jack. How are you holding up?" "Like a car with bad suspension," Jack admitted, attempting humor despite his nerves. "Shaky." Emma slipped her small hand into his larger one, squeezing gently. The simple gesture steadied him, grounding him like an anchor in rough seas. He looked down at his daughter, seeing in her face echoes of her mother's strength. The high school band finished playing their patriotic medley. Mayor Thompson stepped up to the microphone, his voice booming across the square as he welcomed everyone to Willow Creek's annual Veterans Day ceremony. Jack barely heard the words over the pounding of his own heart. "And now," the mayor announced, "I'm honored to introduce our keynote speaker, a man many of us know as a neighbor, a friend, and an honest mechanic. What we didn't know until recently was his extraordinary service to our country. Please welcome Jack Tanner." The applause felt distant, dreamlike. Emma gave his hand one final squeeze before he walked up the wooden steps to the podium. Faces turned toward him, expectant, curious, supportive. In the crowd, he spotted Mason and Cole in their dress uniforms, Harold from the veterans meeting, and dozens of townspeople who'd shown him nothing but kindness over the years. Jack cleared his throat, unfolding his paper with trembling hands. The microphone picked up his nervous breath. "I'm not much for public speaking," he began, his voice rough but sincere. "Most of you know me as the guy who fixes your cars, not someone who stands behind microphones. But sometimes, the truth needs to be spoken, even when it's hard." He paused, looking down at his written words before setting them aside. "No, This needed to come from the heart. People have been calling me a hero since the story broke about my past, about the Ghost of Kabul. But I'm not here to talk about heroism. I'm here to talk about grace. The square fell silent, hanging on his words. 10 years ago, I was part of a mission that went wrong. Very wrong. We lost good men, brothers in arms who deserved to come home to their families. I survived when others didn't, and that burden nearly broke me. Emma watched from the side of the stage, her face glowing with understanding beyond her years. Jack drew strength from her presence. For years, I tried to outrun my past. I thought if I could just forget, if I could bury it deep enough, the pain would go away. But that's not how healing works. The real courage isn't in the fighting. It's in the living that comes after. It's in getting up every morning, choosing to be present, choosing to love, even when your heart is scarred. His voice grew stronger, more confident. I found my peace not in grand gestures or battlefield glory, but in the simple things. In teaching my daughter to ride a bike, in fixing engines that need care, in being part of this community that welcomed a broken man and his little girl without asking questions. Tears glistened in several eyes throughout the crowd. Jack saw Ruby from the diner dabbing at her cheeks with a napkin. War has a cost that can't be measured in dollars or medals. It's measured in empty chairs at dinner tables, in children who grow up without parents, in survivors who carry invisible wounds. But there's also grace, amazing grace, that helps us find our way back. I found that grace right here in Willow Creek, in the kindness of neighbors, in the laughter of children, in the faith that tomorrow can be better than yesterday. The wind rustled through the flags, punctuating his words with gentle snaps of fabric. Today we honor all veterans, not just for their service in uniform, but for their courage in coming home, for choosing life after seeing death, for believing in peace, even after knowing war. That's the real victory. That's the true heroism. Jack's voice softened. To the families who lost loved ones, to the veterans still fighting battles in their minds, to everyone carrying weights they think they can't share, you're not alone. Your community stands with you. Your country remembers you. And there is always, always hope. As he stepped back from the microphone, the square erupted in applause. People rose to their feet, a wave of support and understanding washing over him. Emma ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist as he descended the steps. Tears streamed freely down his face now, but for the first time in years, they weren't tears of pain. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur of handshakes, hugs, and quiet thank yous. Jack felt lighter, as if speaking his truth had lifted a weight he'd carried for far too long. That evening, Jack and Emma sat at their kitchen table, sharing a simple dinner of meatloaf and mashed potatoes. The medals and citations Captain Torres had brought remained in their box, untouched. They didn't matter as much as this moment, just father and daughter, sharing a meal and a peaceful silence. Emma looked up from her plate, her eyes wise and gentle. "Mom would be proud," she said simply. Jack's fork paused halfway to his mouth. He set it down, a soft smile spreading across his face. The first real, unguarded smile in years. In that moment, in their small kitchen, with its worn linoleum floor and humming refrigerator, Jack Tanner felt truly, completely happy. The Texas dawn usually brought hope to Jack Tanner, but this morning was different. He stepped out of his house, coffee mug in hand, and froze. His breath caught in his throat as he stared at the garage door. Bold red letters screamed, "Liar," across the metal surface, the paint still wet and dripping like blood. His hands trembled as he set down his mug on the front step. The morning paper lay in his driveway, and his stomach turned as he saw the headline, "Ghost of Kabul, Hero or Traitor?" Below it, a younger version of himself stared back, his military photo placed next to Colonel Briggs' official congressional portrait. The article was a masterpiece of manipulation. Anonymous sources claimed Jack had abandoned his post during a critical mission, stealing classified intelligence before staging his own death. The paper quoted military experts questioning the timeline of events, suggesting his heroic reputation was built on lies. His phone buzzed. 3 cancellations already. Longtime customers suddenly finding other mechanics. The screen lit up again. The bank. Their message was clear. With his reputation in tatters and business dropping, his loan status was under review. The sound of tires on gravel made him turn. Mrs. Henderson's minivan slowed as she drove past, her eyes meeting his before quickly looking away. She'd brought him cookies just last week, calling him a true American hero. Now, she couldn't even manage a wave. Jack grabbed a bucket and scrub brush from the shop, attacking the spray paint with desperate energy. Each stroke felt like trying to erase more than just paint. Trying to scrub away the doubt, the whispers, the judgment that hung in the air like smoke. "Daddy?" Emma's voice made him stop. She stood in her school uniform, backpack clutched tight against her chest. "Can I stay home today?" His heart cracked. "What happened, sweetheart?" Her lower lip trembled. "Tommy said you're a fake hero, that you left your friends to die." Miss Wilson heard him, but didn't say anything. A tear rolled down her cheek. "She used to show everyone my drawings." Jack pulled her close, feeling her small frame shake with silent sobs. The same teacher who'd praised Emma last week now stood by while children repeated cruel lies. The betrayal burned worse than any combat wound. Inside the garage office, his phone kept buzzing. More cancellations. A message from Pastor Jim asking to discuss recent developments. Even the church was wavering. The community that had embraced him days ago was now backing away, leaving him in a familiar isolation. He tried to work, but his hands shook too much to hold tools steady. The radio played country music like always, but now every song about honor and truth felt like mockery. By noon, the empty parking lot told its own story. No one wanted their car fixed by a traitor. The bank's final notice arrived by email. Without steady income, they couldn't maintain his business loan. 2 weeks to show improved financials, or they'd start foreclosure proceedings. The same bank manager who'd called him a local treasure last month now signed off with cold professionalism. Emma sat at her usual spot on the stack of tires, but instead of homework, she was reading the newspaper article. Jack wanted to snatch it away, protect her from the lies, but she deserved to understand why her world had suddenly turned cold. "They're wrong about you," she said firmly, looking up with eyes too old for her 8 years. "I know they are." Jack's throat tightened. Her faith in him was pure and complete, everything the world's wasn't. But how could he protect that faith when everyone else was determined to destroy it? By early afternoon, the silence in the garage became too heavy to bear. Jack locked up early, his closed sign, joining the spray-painted accusation as twin symbols of his fall from grace. He helped Emma into the truck and drove, needing to escape the suffocating judgment of town. The truck's tires crunched over gravel as he pulled onto the old farm road leading to nowhere. Dust clouds billowed behind them as they passed empty fields, the late autumn sun casting long shadows across the land. Finally, he stopped at the edge of an abandoned pasture, killing the engine. The sudden quiet pressed in from all sides. Emma had fallen asleep in the passenger seat, her face peaceful in a way his couldn't be. Jack stared at the small wooden cross hanging from his rearview mirror, swaying gently in the breeze coming through his cracked window. "Maybe the world was right to forget me," he muttered, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the steering wheel. Jack's old pickup rumbled down the quiet street, its familiar rattle doing little to calm his nerves. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pavement as he turned onto his driveway, the Liar graffiti on his garage door, now a stark reminder of how quickly things could change. His shoulders felt heavy with the weight of the past few days, the whispers, the canceled appointments, the judgmental stares. As he stepped out of his truck, something caught his eye. The red flag on his mailbox stood upright, a silent sentinel in the crisp morning air. Strange, he thought. The mail didn't usually come this early. Walking over, each step measured and cautious, Jack pulled open the mailbox door. Inside lay a single manila envelope, unremarkable except for its simplicity. No return address decorated its surface, just his name written in neat, precise handwriting. Jack Tanner. He stood there for a moment, envelope in hand, studying it as if it might reveal its secrets without being opened. The paper felt thick, substantial. Whatever was inside had weight to it. With careful fingers, he broke the seal and reached inside. His hand emerged holding a photograph, its edges slightly worn but the image crystal clear. The moment he saw it, the world around him seemed to fade away. There he was, younger and covered in dust, carrying a wounded soldier through what looked like hell itself, the Kabul exodus. The air had been thick with smoke that day, the sound of gunfire everywhere. In the photo, his face was streaked with dirt and blood, but his expression showed nothing but determination as he carried his fallen brother in arms to safety. A letter accompanied the photo, the paper crisp and new. Jack's hand shook slightly as he unfolded it. Dear Ghost of Kabul, my name is Thomas Mitchell. The man you're carrying in that photo is my father, James Mitchell. I was 12 years old when this picture was taken, waiting at home with my mom, praying Dad would come back to us. He did come back, because of you. Dad told me stories about that day, about the soldier who appeared out of nowhere like an angel in the chaos. He said you never stopped, never hesitated, just kept going back for more men even when others said it was hopeless. You gave them hope when there was none left. I'm 20 now, and Dad's still here because of what you did. He got to see me graduate high school, taught me to drive, walked my sister down the aisle last spring. Every happy moment we've had these past 8 years, they're all because of you. I saw the news about you in Willow Creek. Dad recognized you instantly from the newspaper photo. We don't care what they're saying about you now. We know the truth. And why. They were backed where Willow Creek. You're a hero, sir. Always will be. Thank you for giving me more years with my father. Sincerely, Thomas Mitchell. Jack's legs gave out, and he sank to his knees right there on the porch. The photo trembled in his hands as tears blurred his vision. All these years he'd carried the weight of that day like a stone in his chest. The men he couldn't save, the betrayal that forced him into hiding, the shame of disappearing. But here, in his hands, was proof that it hadn't all been for nothing. James Mitchell had lived, had watched his son grow up, had danced at his daughter's wedding. All those precious moments of life that Jack had fought so hard to protect, they had happened. The morning light grew stronger, painting the world in shades of gold. A gentle breeze rustled the trees, carrying with it the sweet scent of spring. Jack looked up at the brightening sky, tears running freely down his face now. Thank you, Lord, he whispered, clutching the photo to his chest. I understand now. In that moment, on his knees on his front porch, Jack Tanner felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not the false peace of hiding, but the real peace that comes with purpose. The graffiti on his garage door no longer seemed so threatening. Briggs' lies felt smaller somehow, because the truth wasn't in newspaper headlines or political smear campaigns. The truth was in a father walking his daughter down the aisle. The truth was in a son's grateful letter. The truth was in the lives that continued because of choices made in moments of crisis. For the first time since the Kabul exodus, Jack felt the full weight of his purpose. He wasn't just a mechanic hiding from his past. He wasn't just a single father trying to make ends meet. He was the ghost of Kabul, not because he had disappeared, but because he had appeared when hope seemed lost. He had been there when it mattered most. The morning sun continued its ascent, warming his face as he knelt there, holding the photo like a precious gift. In the distance, a church bell rang, its clear tones carrying across the quiet town. Jack closed his eyes, letting the peace wash over him. Thank you, Lord, he whispered again. I understand now. The morning air held a crisp bite, as Jack walked up the worn wooden steps of Pastor Jim's small house next to the church. His work-roughened hands clutched the envelope, now wrinkled from being read countless times since yesterday. The porch swing creaked in the gentle breeze, and wind chimes tinkled softly above. Pastor Jim opened the door before Jack could knock, as if he'd been expecting him. His weathered face broke into a warm smile. "Jack, come on in, son." He gestured toward his study, where morning light streamed through stained glass windows, painting the room in soft colors. Jack sank into the familiar leather armchair, running his fingers over the envelope. "I got this yesterday," he said quietly, pulling out the photograph and letter. His hands trembled slightly as he passed them to Pastor Jim. The pastor adjusted his reading glasses, studying the combat photo carefully. Jack watched as the older man's eyes moved across the page, reading the heartfelt words from a grateful son. When he finished, Pastor Jim removed his glasses slowly, wiping moisture from his eyes. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he said softly. "Sometimes he sends us exactly what we need, right when we need it most." Jack leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I've been running, Jim, running from the truth, from who I am. But seeing this," he tapped the photo, "it reminds me there's more at stake than just my peace of mind." Pastor Jim nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Let's pray about this, Jack." They bowed their heads together in the quiet study. Pastor Jim's steady voice filled the room with words of guidance and strength, asking for wisdom and courage. When the prayer ended, Jack felt something shift inside him, like a heavy door slowly opening. "Truth isn't a weapon, Jack. It's light," Pastor Jim said, placing a firm hand on Jack's shoulder. "Let it shine." Those words settled deep in Jack's heart. He stood, suddenly certain of what he needed to do. "I have to face Briggs," he said. "Not just for me, but for everyone who deserves to know what really happened." "The truth will set you free," Pastor Jim replied, standing with him. "But remember, you're not alone in this fight." Jack left the pastor's house with renewed purpose. He pulled out his phone and made 2 calls, one to Mason, one to Cole. They agreed to meet at the diner in an hour. Ruby's diner was quiet between breakfast and lunch. The 3 men sat in a corner booth, coffee cups steaming before them. Mason and Cole listened intently as Jack laid out what he needed. "Briggs falsified those reports," Jack explained, keeping his voice low. "He left us there, then covered it up. But with your testimonies about the inconsistencies you found in the official record." Cole leaned forward, his face determined. "We're with you, Ghost. All the way." Mason nodded seriously. "My father died in that operation. I deserve to know the truth. We all do." He pulled out a folder from his jacket. "I've been gathering evidence since I first recognized you. Discrepancies in the mission logs, witness statements that never made it into the official record." Jack felt a surge of gratitude for these men, brothers he never expected to find again. "This won't be easy," he warned. "Briggs has power, connections. So do we," Cole replied with a fierce grin. "The truth has a way of finding allies." They spent the next hour planning their approach. Word spread quickly through town that Jack was fighting back. By afternoon, his phone was buzzing with messages of support. The hardware store owner offered to help clean the graffiti. The local paper editor wanted to hear his side of the story. Even some of his canceled customers called to reschedule. As evening settled over Willow Creek, Jack felt hope stirring in his chest for the first time in days. He made dinner for Emma, her favorite mac and cheese, and watched as she pushed the noodles around her plate. "You okay, sweetheart?" he asked softly. She looked up at him with those wise eyes that sometimes seemed too old for her young face. "Are we gonna be okay, Daddy?" Jack reached across the table and took her small hand in his. "We're gonna make things right," he said firmly. Emma nodded, a sleepy smile crossing her face. "I know," she said simply, with all the pure faith of a child who trusted her father completely. That trust, more precious than anything else in his life, strengthened Jack's resolve. As he tucked her into bed later, he saw the photograph on her nightstand, the one from Kabul that had started everything. Emma had placed it in a simple frame, right next to the picture of her mother. "Good night, Daddy," she murmured, already drifting off to sleep. "Good night, baby girl," he whispered back, watching hope flicker across her peaceful face like a candle in the dark. The town hall buzzed with anticipation. Red, white, and blue banners hung from the walls, and campaign posters featuring Congressman Briggs' practiced smile dotted every corner. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over the packed rows of metal folding chairs. Jack's boots felt heavy as he slipped in through the back door. He wore his cleanest pair of jeans and a pressed button-down shirt, the one Emma had helped him iron that morning. His calloused fingers touched the envelope in his pocket, drawing strength from its presence. Briggs stood at the podium, his silver hair perfectly styled, his navy suit crisp and expensive. "As your representative, I promise to uphold the values that make our military strong." His voice carried that same smooth confidence that had once commanded soldiers in Kabul. Jack's heart thundered in his chest as he moved down the center aisle. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Someone gasped, "It's him! The Ghost!" A news camera swung in his direction. "Excuse me, Congressman," Jack said, his voice steady despite his racing pulse. "I think it's time we talked about Kabul." Briggs' practiced smile flickered for just a moment. "I'm afraid public comment time is scheduled for later." "No, sir," Jack interrupted, pulling out the photograph. "This can't wait any longer." He held it up for everyone to see, the image of himself carrying a wounded soldier through smoke and fire. "That's me, 10 years ago, during the mission you said never happened." The room fell silent, every eye fixed on Jack as he continued. "You left us there, 32 men, waiting for extraction. You had the helicopters, but you ordered them to pull back, to save your own career when things got complicated." "These are ridiculous accusations," Briggs snapped, but his face had gone pale. "Security, please remove this man." 2 guards started forward, but Mason and Cole stood up from their seats near the front. "Let him speak," Cole called out. Other veterans in the audience rose too, forming a protective circle around Jack. Jack's voice grew stronger. "I have proof. The letter from the soldier I carried out, the one you listed as killed in action to cover your tracks." He unfolded the wrinkled paper. His son wrote to thank the Ghost of Kabul for giving him more years with his father. "Years you tried to erase." Murmurs swept through the crowd. Phones recorded everything. Briggs gripped the podium, knuckles white. "This is slander. I served my country with honor." "You served yourself," Jack cut in, his words sharp but controlled. 8 good men died that day because you abandoned us. 8 families got flags instead of fathers coming home. And you buried the truth under medals and lies. An older veteran in the back called out, "I lost my son in Kabul." Others joined in, voices rising with years of suppressed grief and anger. Briggs tried to speak over the crowd, but his authority had crumbled. Sweat beaded on his forehead under the harsh lights. The cameras caught everything, his stammering denials, his trembling hands, the mask of leadership falling away to reveal the coward beneath. "I didn't come here for revenge," Jack said quietly. But his words carried through the chaos. "I came because those men deserved better. Their families deserved the truth. And sometimes the only way to heal is to bring things into the light." The room erupted in applause and shouts. Mason stepped forward to share what he knew about the falsified reports. Cole added his testimony about the cover-up he'd discovered in military records. Briggs's face twisted with rage and fear. Without another word, he stormed off the stage, shouldering past his stunned campaign staff. The crowd surged forward, reporters calling questions, veterans sharing their own stories of that dark day in Kabul. But Jack didn't stay to soak in the victory. As cameras flashed and voices swelled, he slipped out a side door into the cool evening air. The weight of a decade's silence lifted from his shoulders, replaced by a quiet peace that felt like grace. He leaned against the brick wall, breathing deeply. The truth was out, not for glory or vengeance, but because it was right. Because sometimes the only way forward is through the past. Inside, he could hear the crowd still buzzing with revelation and reaction. But out here, under the gentle Texas sky, Jack found what he'd really been looking for all along. Not fame or vindication, just the simple freedom of an honest heart. The morning sun painted long shadows across the freshly swept concrete floor of Tanner's Auto Repair. Jack stood in the doorway, coffee mug warming his hands, watching Mason and Cole unload paint supplies from the back of an old pickup truck. The spring breeze carried the sweet scent of blooming wildflowers from nearby fields. "You sure about this color, Ghost?" Cole held up a can of deep navy blue paint, his usual playful grin lighting up his face. "We could go with something more exciting. Maybe hot pink?" Jack chuckled and shook his head. "Think I'll stick with the classic look." Emma bounced out of the shop office, her pigtails swinging. "Daddy, I finished designing the flyers." She thrust a paper into his hands, beaming with pride. The crayon drawing showed a car with angel wings, surrounded by happy stick figures in military uniforms. "This is perfect, sweetheart." Jack ruffled her hair, his heart swelling. "Why don't you help Lieutenant Mason set up the drop cloths?" "Yes, sir." She skipped over to Mason, who lifted her onto his shoulders with practiced ease. Together, they spread plastic sheets beneath the shop's worn signage. The morning progressed with steady work and easy conversation. Cole told stories from his latest training exercises while rolling paint onto the walls. Mason's quiet presence provided balance, his methodical brush strokes matching Jack's own careful pace. Emma flitted between them all, offering water bottles and sharing knock-knock jokes that made even the most focused painter pause to laugh. Around noon, Ruby from the diner appeared with a basket of sandwiches and sweet tea. "Thought my favorite mechanics might need some fuel," she called out, setting up an impromptu picnic on a clean workbench. "You're an angel, Ruby," Cole declared, reaching for a sandwich. Jack watched his daughter chat animatedly with Ruby about the shop's transformation. The diner owner had been one of the first to welcome him back after the truth about Briggs came out, her daily pie deliveries a silent gesture of support that meant more than words ever could. After lunch, they tackled the sign. The old Tanner's Auto Repair lettering came down piece by piece. In its place, they carefully mounted the new text, "Ghost Auto, Veterans Welcome." The words gleamed in the afternoon sun, a testament to new beginnings. "Looks good, Jack," Mason said quietly, standing back to admire their work. "Really good." Emma tugged at Jack's sleeve. "Can I start handing out the flyers now?" "Please?" "Hold your horses, kiddo." Jack checked his watch. "Let's wait for the paint to dry first." "Meanwhile, why don't you tell everyone about your idea for the Veterans Fund?" Emma's face lit up. She pulled a decorated jar from behind the counter, already containing a handful of bills. "We're going to help fix cars for soldiers and their families who can't afford it," she announced proudly. "Because that's what heroes do. They help people." Cole wiped paint from his hands and dropped a 20 into the jar. "Count me in, squirt." That's some mighty fine thinking. As the afternoon wore on, more townspeople stopped by to admire the renovations. Pastor Jim brought coffee and prayers. The hardware store owner offered spare supplies, even old misses. Peterson, who'd once warned others about the mysterious mechanic, came by with homemade cookies and an apologetic smile. Emma darted between visitors, distributing her carefully crafted flyers with enthusiasm. "My daddy fixes cars and helps soldiers," she told anyone who would listen, "and sometimes he lets me hold the flashlight." Jack watched it all from his familiar spot by the tool chest, overwhelmed by the simple grace of belonging. The shop had always been his sanctuary, but now it felt like something more, a mission, a purpose, a way to honor both his past and his future. As the sun began its descent, Mason helped Emma pack up the last of the painting supplies while Cole hung a small American flag beside the entrance. The fresh paint gleamed in the golden light, transforming the humble garage into something almost noble. "Time to close up, Jack," announced, but Cole shook his head. "Not yet, Ghost. You've got one more stop to make." They drove to the town park, where smoke from barbecue grills drifted through the evening air. Families sprawled across picnic blankets. Children chased fireflies, and the sound of guitar music floated from a nearby pavilion. Jack recognized faces from the veteran support group mingled with his neighbors, all gathered in casual celebration. Emma immediately spotted Eli, Mason's son, and raced off to join the other children playing tag. Jack found himself surrounded by handshakes and warm greetings, genuine smiles replacing the wary glances of months past. "Pull up a chair, Ghost." Harold, the older veteran from the support group, called out. He was manning one of the grills, spatula, waving like a conductor's baton. "These burgers aren't going to eat themselves." Jack settled into a lawn chair, accepting a paper plate loaded with food. The evening air was soft and sweet, filled with conversation and laughter. Cole told increasingly outrageous jokes, while Mason quietly strummed his guitar. Emma's giggles mixed with the chirping crickets, a melody of pure joy. Watching his daughter chase lightning bugs with Eli, Jack felt the last pieces of his guarded heart shift into place. The weight of being the Ghost of Kabul had lifted, replaced by something lighter. The simple blessing of being known, accepted, and loved for exactly who he was. As fireflies danced and stars began to peek through the twilight, Jack looked around at the gathering. These weren't just customers or neighbors anymore. They were family. The kind forged not by blood, but by grace and second chances. The kind that welcomed ghosts home and helped them remember how to live again. Emma flopped into his lap, breathless from playing. "This is the best day ever," she declared, snuggling against his chest. Jack wrapped his arms around her, breathing in the scent of sunshine and paint that clung to her hair. A profound peace settled over him, deeper than the silence he'd hidden in for so long. Here, under the vast Texas sky, surrounded by the simple goodness of community, he was finally, truly free. Spring sunshine warmed the weathered pavement outside Tanner's Auto Repair, where colorful wildflowers pushed through cracks in the concrete. The familiar scent of motor oil mingled with the sweet fragrance of Texas bluebonnets that dotted the nearby field. "That's it, Emma. Keep those eyes forward," Jack called out, jogging alongside his daughter's wobbling bicycle. The training wheels had come off this morning, and Emma's determined face showed both concentration and excitement. "I'm doing it, Daddy. I'm really doing it," she squealed, her pigtails bouncing beneath her pink helmet. Her knuckles were white as she gripped the handlebars, but her smile could have lit up the darkest night. Jack's heart swelled as he watched her pedal faster, his hand hovering near her back. The bike steadied for a moment, and Emma's confidence grew. Then the front wheel turned sharply, and she tumbled onto the grass with a surprised, "Oof." "Emma." Jack rushed to her side, but before he could reach her, she was already giggling, grass stains decorating her jeans. "Did you see how long I stayed up that time?" she asked, brushing herself off. Her eyes sparkled with determination. "Can we try again?" Jack helped her up, checking for scrapes but finding only her unwavering spirit. "That's my girl," he said softly, straightening her helmet. "Remember what I told you about falling?" Emma stood tall, reciting his words. "Getting back up makes you stronger than never falling at all." They practiced for another hour, Emma's confidence growing with each attempt. The spring breeze carried the sound of her laughter across the parking lot, mixing with the distant church bells and the rustle of new leaves. A familiar truck pulled into the lot. Mason's old Ford. He stepped out, dressed in civilian clothes, a warm smile on his face as he watched Emma make another wobbly attempt. "Looking good there, kiddo," Mason called out, giving Emma a thumbs up as she passed by. Jack waited until Emma was safely stopped before walking over to greet his friend. They stood together, watching as Emma carefully pushed her bike back toward them. "Got some news," Mason said quietly, his expression serious but peaceful. "Thought you should hear it from me first." Jack nodded, sensing the weight of the moment. Emma had wandered over to the water fountain, giving them space to talk. "Briggs was indicted this morning," Mason continued. "Fraud, perjury, falsifying military records. They're throwing the book at him. The truth about Kabul finally came out, all of it." Jack absorbed the news silently, watching Emma as she traced patterns in the dirt with her shoe. The weight of the past few months, the accusations, the revelations, the healing, settled around them like dust after a storm. "How do you feel about it?" Mason asked carefully. Jack took a deep breath, considering the question. The anger that had once burned so hot inside him had cooled into something different, something closer to peace. "You know," he said slowly, "I thought this moment would feel different, like winning something. But honestly," he shook his head, "I just feel grateful." Mason raised an eyebrow. "Grateful?" "For this," Jack gestured around him, "at the garage with its fresh paint, at Emma drinking from the fountain, at the town beyond with its familiar streets and friendly faces. For second chances. For learning that letting go doesn't mean giving up." Emma bounced back over to them, her helmet slightly askew. "Uncle Mason, did you see me writing?" "Daddy says I'm getting really good." Mason knelt down to her level. "You sure are, sweetheart. Pretty soon you'll be teaching your old dad some tricks." They spent the rest of the afternoon together, Mason joining in to help Emma practice. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. After Mason left, Jack and Emma headed home for dinner. A simple meal of spaghetti and meatballs, Emma's favorite. Later, as Jack tucked Emma into bed, her room glowing softly in the light of her star-shaped nightlight, she looked up at him with those wise eyes that sometimes seemed to see right through him. "Daddy?" she asked, clutching her stuffed rabbit close. "Yes, sweetheart? Are you still the Ghost of Kabul?" The question hung in the air for a moment, gentle and important. Jack smiled, reaching out to smooth her hair back from her forehead. In that touch was all the love and certainty he'd found in this new life they'd built together. "No, sweetheart," he said softly. "I'm just your dad now." Emma nodded, satisfied with this answer. She snuggled deeper under her covers, already drifting toward sleep. "That's better anyway," she murmured. The Texas dawn painted the sky in gentle strokes of pink and gold as Jack's old pickup truck rumbled down the quiet streets of Willow Creek. Memorial Day flags lined the sidewalks, their crisp colors catching the early morning light like tiny beacons of remembrance. The red, white, and blue fabric danced softly in the warm breeze that carried the scent of honeysuckle and fresh-cut grass. Emma sat beside him, in her Sunday best, a simple blue dress with white buttons that she'd chosen herself carefully, holding a bouquet of white lilies and blue cornflowers they'd picked from Pastor Jim's garden the evening before. The truck's engine hummed its familiar tune, a sound that had become as comforting as a lullaby over the past year. Jack's calloused hands rested easy on the steering wheel, no longer gripping it like a lifeline. Through the windshield, he could see the town slowly waking up. Mrs. Henderson was already tending her flower boxes, and old Pete was setting up chairs on his porch, preparing for the Memorial Day parade that would wind through town later. Jack parked near the church, where the town's veteran memorial stood sentinel in the dewy grass. The granite monument bore the names of those who had given everything for their country. each letter carved deep in painted gold so they'd catch the light just like this. His weathered hands rested on the steering wheel for a moment, drawing strength from the peaceful silence that surrounded them like a prayer. The morning held that special quality of Texas dawns when the air was still cool and sweet before the heat settled in for the day. Mockingbirds called from the oak trees that shaded the church, their songs mixing with the distant sound of someone starting up a lawnmower. It was the soundtrack of small-town life, ordinary and beautiful in its simplicity. "Ready, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice soft in the morning stillness. Emma nodded, her face solemn with understanding beyond her years. She'd asked him last night what Memorial Day really meant, and he'd done his best to explain not about war or politics, but about people who love their families and their country enough to risk everything. "Yes, Daddy. I want to tell them thank you." They walked together across the lawn, their footsteps leaving dark prints in the sparkling grass. The morning air was cool and fresh, carrying the sweet scent of magnolia blossoms from the church garden and the earthy smell of rich Texas soil. Jack wore his work jacket not because he had to work today, but because it felt right. The faded denim had become like a second skin, soft from washing and honest work. It was who he was now. A mechanic, a father, a man at peace with both his past and present. The memorial stood about 8 feet tall, its surface polished to mirror brightness. Flowers from other early visitors already decorated its base, red roses, small American flags, and a child's drawing taped to the stone that read, "Thank you," in crayon letters. Jack felt his throat tighten as he recognized the careful way someone had arranged each tribute. At the memorial, Emma carefully arranged the flowers at its base, while Jack stood quietly, reading the familiar names. Some belonged to men he'd known, boys, really, who'd grown up too fast in places far from home. Others were strangers who shared the same calling, fathers and sons and brothers who'd answered when their country called. His fingers traced the cool stone, remembering not their deaths but their lives. The way Tommy Rodriguez always shared his grandmother's cookies from care packages, how David Chen could fix anything with a paperclip and some wire. The sleeve of his jacket had rolled up, revealing the tattoo that had once marked him as a ghost. The winged skull remained, bold and black against his weathered skin, but below it, newer ink told a different story. Faith restored. The words were his testimony, etched not just in skin, but in the life he'd rebuilt here in Willow Creek. Pastor Jim had been with him when he'd gotten those new words added, praying over them before the needle ever touched skin. A year had passed since that final confrontation with Briggs. The headlines had screamed for weeks: congressional scandal, military cover-up exposed, hero returns from the dead. But here in Willow Creek, life had settled back into its gentle rhythm. The truth had come out. Justice had been served through proper channels. But more importantly, healing had begun. His auto shop now served as an unofficial gathering place for local veterans, a place where broken things, whether engines or spirits, could find repair. Mason Reed stopped by most afternoons with his boy Eli, and they'd work on old motorcycles while the kids played in the yard behind the shop. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the memorial grounds. A squirrel chattered from the nearby pecan tree, and somewhere a dog barked once before settling back into peaceful silence. Emma slipped her small hand into his, and Jack felt the familiar surge of gratitude that always accompanied her touch. She'd been his anchor through it all, her unwavering love showing him the way back to himself when the darkness seemed too thick to navigate. "Tell me about them, Daddy," Emma said quietly, looking at the names on the stone. Her voice held that careful reverence children use in churches and cemeteries, places where whispers feel more appropriate than regular talk. Jack knelt beside her, his knees creaking slightly as he settled on the cool grass. His voice was gentle, the way it always became when he talked about things that mattered most. They were heroes, baby. Not because they were perfect or fearless, but because they chose to serve others above themselves. He paused, touching one particular name with the tip of his finger. This was Lieutenant Mike Sanders. He loved telling jokes, terrible ones that made everyone groan and cover their ears. But he always made sure his men ate before. He did, and he never forgot anyone's birthday. Emma listened intently as Jack shared stories, not of battles or violence, but of brotherhood and sacrifice, of small kindnesses and quiet courage that bloomed even in the hardest places. He told her about the way soldiers looked out for each other, how they shared everything from letters to last pieces of chocolate. The morning air filled with memories of men who had lived and died with honor, their stories breathing life into cold stone. A soft breeze stirred the flags overhead, their gentle rustling like whispered prayers carried on the wind. Jack felt the weight of his past, but it no longer crushed him like a stone on his chest. Instead, it grounded him, like roots that had finally found fertile soil after years of searching. The ghosts that had haunted him weren't gone. They never would be completely, but they'd transformed from tormentors into companions, walking beside him instead of dragging him down. The church bells began to toll in the distance, their clear notes floating across the morning air like liquid silver. Jack watched as rays of sunlight caught the dew on the memorial's polished surface, creating tiny rainbows that danced and shifted with each breath of wind. It reminded him of something Pastor Jim had said about how God could make beauty from brokenness, how even shattered things could reflect light in ways that whole things never could. Emma stood up and brushed grass from her dress, then looked up at him with those eyes that saw everything and judged nothing. "Time to head home?" she asked, squeezing his hand with gentle pressure. Jack smiled, feeling the rightness of the moment settle in his chest like warm coffee on a cold morning. They turned away from the memorial, walking unhurried through the quiet Texas morning. The bell's echoes followed them, a blessing in bronze and air that seemed to wrap around them like an invisible embrace. His shop would be closed today, the first Memorial Day. In 20 years, he hadn't felt guilty about taking time to remember. But tomorrow, he'd return to his work, to the honest labor of fixing what was broken and helping those who needed it. The Ghost of Kabul had found his way home, not to haunt, but to heal, not to hide, but to help others find their own paths back to the light. As they walked, Jack whispered to the wind, words of gratitude carried on the morning breeze. "I'm home. Finally, truly home." The sound floated away on the Texas morning. A prayer of thanksgiving, a soldier's final peace, carried toward heaven on the wings of mockingbirds, and the gentle rustle of Memorial Day flags. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Jack Tanner, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.